Hi everyone, I'm Sandhya Menon, and today I'm going to be reading to you a passage from my book Of Curses and Kisses, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that is set at an elite boarding school in Colorado. So we are today following the two main characters, Grey and Jaya, as they talk in Aspen, and Grey is confessing something very big that has haunted him all his life to Jaya. Without quite making the decision to, Grey found himself speaking. "Do you know anything at all about your pendant?" he asked, staring straight ahead. Also looking straight ahead, Jaya said carefully, "Well, as I told you before, my father got it at a gold souk in Dubai, but that's really all I know." Grey studied her clear brown eyes. He believed her, he decided, and suddenly he wanted to tell her, almost more than he'd ever wanted anything in his entire life. He'd never considered telling anyone before, but the idea of telling Jaya felt different somehow. And how amazing would it feel to set this burden down just for a few moments, to share it with someone else for a bit. How sweet would the relief taste if he were able to share the shameful, dark secret that had plagued him since he was born. How hilariously ironic, and maybe perfectly fitting, that the first person he'd tell would be the progeny of the one who'd cursed him in the first place. Grey took a few lungfuls of the cold, icy air, tasting snow in the back of his throat. He moved his gaze from the city below them to Jaya's face as he said the next sentence, the first time he'd ever uttered it out loud. Grey was aware he was passing through a doorway, that he'd never be able to take this back once it was out there, but maybe it was time. "I killed my mother, and my father believes I'm cursed." Jaya. Jaya stared at him, her blood going cold. She was suddenly aware she'd chosen a rather out-of-the-way spot to have this conversation with a very large man. You killed your mother? How had she not known this? Why hadn't anyone at St. Rosetta's told her? She'd always thought that Grey's mother had died in childbirth, not as a consequence of matricide. Grey nodded. "She died in childbirth, bringing me into this world." A sigh of relief whooshed out of Jaya. Oh. She shook her head. "That doesn't mean you killed." His blue eyes flashed. "Yes, I did. It was all foretold. Because, like I said, I'm cursed." Jaya frowned a little. "Cursed? What do you mean?" What was he talking about? Was that some kind of slang she was unfamiliar with? Then, as understanding dawned, her eyebrows shot straight up. "Does this have anything to do with my family? The ruby stolen from the temple in the 1800s? Grey dug his boots into the powdery snow. "I'm not surprised you've heard of it. It was your great-great-grandmother who cursed the ruby." Jaya could tell he was trying not to say it like an accusation, but he didn't fully succeed. "Yes, but surely he wasn't serious. Surely Grey, a well-educated boy in the 21st century, didn't believe in something as far-fetched as a curse." Jaya watched him for a second. He gazed steadily back at her. "Great, that's just a story. No one in my family believes it to be true. My great-great-grandmother was angry. The curse was just meant to strike fear into the hearts of those who stole the ruby." "Do you know what it says?" Grey asked. "Have you ever heard the actual words she's supposed to have spoken?" Jaya thought about it. "I know it had something to do with a future heir, but—" She shook her head. He spoke the words quickly but clearly, the words coming as easily as if he were reciting Jack and Jill. It was as if they'd been ingrained in him since he was a little boy, right alongside all the nursery rhymes. "A hallowed dream stolen, a world darkly despairs. A storm, a life, a sudden death, herald the end, the last heir. As the glass rose dims, so the hope of redemption. 18 years, one by one, until what's left is none. Mend that which is broken, repair that which is severed, or the Emerson name is forsaken and shall vanish at last forever." The weight of the words hovered between them. Goose flesh rose on Jaya's arms and legs. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. What does it mean? Parts of it sound like riddles. I used to think that too, Gray said, but things are starting to get clearer. The ruby my family stole from the temple was sold to a jeweler in the Middle East and then broken apart and placed into a rose-shaped pendant. You said your father bought your pendant in Dubai. Jaya's hand flew to her throat, grasping for the pendant that wasn't there. No, you don't think my pendant holds the original ruby? It seemed impossible. The ruby was stolen from the temple in the 1800s, and it coincidentally ends up back around her neck in the 21st century? What were the chances? The wind whistled through the pine trees around them as Gray spoke. I didn't really want to believe it either. All my life, this curse has hovered over me. It's why my dad sent me to St. Ars. My mother died because of me. A storm, a life, a sudden death, herald the end, the last heir. The night I was born, Westboro saw the worst storm it had seen in a century. My father was away on business, and he couldn't get to the estate on time. No one could. My mother had to deliver me herself with the help of our housekeeper. Gray paused. Jaya could almost see the old story he must have been told all his life working its way under his skin, the guilt blossoming in his chest. She died shortly after I was born. He swallowed and brushed more snow off the boulder with one hand. The doctor wasn't able to come, and she didn't get the medical care she needed. My father knew immediately it was the curse. The cold from the boulder began to seep in through Jaya's clothes. She brought her mind back to the present. And you really believe in the curse? She asked softly. I wasn't really given a choice. I was told what the truth was when I was very, very young, and I accepted it, like we all do. My father has always believed in the curse very strongly. The Emersons have always believed in it, in fact, going back many generations. Of course, when they first heard it had been cursed, they didn't want to return it to Mysuru. They were way too spiteful and small-minded for that, so they broke it up and sold it instead, hoping that would get rid of the curse. Gray took his ski hat off and pulled a hand through his hair, shaking his head. Do you know how many times I've wished I wasn't an Emerson? How many times I've wished I was born an orphan with no name and no title? After a moment, gathering himself, he said, Anyway, then I met you. He glanced at Jaya and back down at the city. You had a pendant that fit the bill, but you didn't seem to know it. That first morning in the dining hall, when you told me a ruby had fallen, you left the table, Jaya mused, remembering the way he'd looked, like he'd had a bad scare. I wondered why. I was completely and thoroughly shocked. I thought I had to be overreacting. I didn't know if you were playing a joke on me. And then, at the mixer, when 2 more rubies fell, I began to panic. As the glass rose dims, so the hope of redemption. 18 years, one by one, until what's left is none. It's counting down to my 18th birthday in December. I can feel it. Every time I'm around your pendant, I can practically hear a clock's hands, ticking down the time until... He turned to her, his eyes roving her face. That's the reason I don't date, Jaya. Once that last ruby falls, that's the end of me. The Emerson line is finished, and so am I. I hope you enjoyed that passage from Of Curses and Kisses, a Beauty and the Beast retelling set at an elite boarding school. Thanks for listening today. Bye!
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to Gotham Reads for more of your favorite children's books read aloud daily.